very grateful for your lovely introduction and вдячна всім, що ви прибули сьогодні, чи вдень, чи вночі, за вашу підтримку і ваше зацікавлення. Дозвольте мені поділитися своїм екраном і розпочати нашу презентацію. Чи видно? Так?
Видно.
Супер. Адже ж я вас знову дуже щиро вітаю. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me today, especially as we've now crossed the unfortunate 3-year threshold of Russia's war in Ukraine. But how education copes continues to be a key issue and must remain at the top of all narrative agendas. Many thanks to Dr. Ulana Pidzamecky, a longtime mentor and colleague and friend, Dr. Maria Ostroha, and the entire ULEC team for their ongoing and innovative leadership, and for inviting me to address you today about recently completed doctoral research at the University of Glasgow, a study that came to life following a rather long and storied personal educational journey. But allow me to take you on a somewhat express trip to help you understand how I arrived at this research. Where did it spring from? Well, as a first-generation Ukrainian Canadian and child of post-World War II third-wave political immigrants to Canada, my life and activities have been immersed in political and cultural context. Generations like mine, raised in liberation struggle environments, tend to wonder about questions of identity and place, history and its continuum, and the relationship between individuals and the various cultural communities of which they are a part. Appreciating the diverse needs of subsequent waves of Ukrainian immigration to Canada, which have demanded innovation in learning and teaching both in the public school system and the weekend heritage language program, and following several university degrees related to what I did next, I chose first to do a master's investigation that compared the work of Ukrainian elementary teachers in Canada and Ukraine. And this comparative investigation was considered unusual, and it opened up a new area of discourse and subsequently my doctoral work. Just very briefly about the master's. The master study, which was entitled Investigating the Role of Online Communities of Practice in Professional Learning, the Experience of Foreign Language Teachers, took a closer look at the informal online community of practice to determine its potential value as an alternative professional learning in the area of second language teaching, of which Ukrainian is a part. At the time, the research was limited when it comes to teacher involvement in informal online communities of practice for professional learning, and there was still less specific to language, and specifically more Ukrainian language teachers. So this study was unusual in that it compared the experiences of Ukrainian teachers in Canada using the online teaching space. I was using Adobe Connect at the time, with Ukrainian teachers in Ukraine in the physical teaching space. I met with my cohort in Lviv. A number of case studies have indicated that digital teacher interactions in these communities support their ongoing professional learning by reducing isolation, encouraging collective intelligence, and providing a space for teachers to appreciate that to be a professional is to be a learner. And so, following my master's thesis, I continued to think about teachers as professionals and what this means in the Ukrainian context. And in light of the upheaval wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic and education's tectonic response through digitalization of education, I felt that I need to dig deeper, заглибитися в професіоналізм українських вчителів. This idea took on new meaning and urgency when, as it turned out, my doctoral data collection coincided with the outbreak of Russia's invasion in 2022. My doctoral study sought Ukrainian elementary school teacher perceptions of what professional flourishing means to them within the current educational environment of Ukraine. I conducted my investigation with two aims in mind: to increase the body of knowledge related to post-Soviet Ukrainian pedagogy and education policy, and to encourage Ukrainian teachers to engage with research to sustain their professionalism over their careers. I believe that by participating in research studies, Ukrainian teachers can remember that they too are intellectuals, in the words of Henri Giroux, build new professional networks and communities, which harkens back to my master's work, mutually inform their practices, and increase agency and voice in their poly-crisis conditions. Let me draw your attention to the quote from Katerina Hornostai, the director of the recently premiered and highly acclaimed film about Ukrainian teachers, Timestamp. Amidst the chaos of war, education becomes an act of resistance. Contemporary Ukrainian teachers need to engage with research to help them unpack the increasing demands they face. I believe that these aims contribute to the overarching goal of de-ghettoizing Ukrainian education by raising its profile in the international arena and adding to a more robust global discourse about education reforms in Eastern Europe. My main research question and sub-questions were the following. What does it mean to flourish professionally for Ukrainian elementary school teachers? What do they feel might enable or impede their sense of professional flourishing? Що сприяє або перешкоджає їхньому процвітанню? What are their views about continuous professional development in relation to their professional flourishing? Роль безперервного професійного розвитку. And how do they see their role evolving under democratic reforms in Ukraine? And what is their ideal vision for the country's educational future? Бачення освітнього майбутнього України. The theoretical considerations grounding the study included flourishing and the related notion of capabilities, neoliberal policy technologies, and teacher professionalism and professionalization. Let me say a few words about each of these. Research on flourishing, розквіт, процвітання, speaks of two perspectives, hedonistic from the Greek related to personal pleasure and eudaimonic from the Greek for a good-spirited life. The hedonistic centers on personal happiness and growth, the eudaimonic on conducting one's life towards the greater good. And that is actually what's most closely associated with the English term flourishing. Eudaimonia was given expression by Aristotle many centuries ago, who felt a good life represented a combination of these elements. But to better understand human flourishing in modern times, the capabilities approach, підхід заснований на спроможностях, was put forth by economist philosopher Amartya Sen and later expanded very famously by philosopher Martha Nussbaum and subsequent scholars. Sen defined capabilities as opportunities that individuals need to achieve certain functionings. So capabilities are the individual's ability to do something, while functionings represent the actions or doings. And capabilities can mean a positive freedom or a negative freedom. I'll be returning to this later. Positive freedom being when a person can do what they desire, but negative freedom is they may have the choices but are not able to exercise them. Nussbaum, too, considers flourishing to be a balance of capabilities and functionings, where capabilities are activated by a person's personal and contextual possibilities, and this supports flourishing. Neoliberalism. It began as a reaction, as probably many of you know, to the economic and political catastrophes of the early 20th century. The Great Depression, collectivism, totalitarianism, fascism. Scholars argue, though, that the most significant shift it brought was the rise of knowledge as capital, the knowledge economy, and that this change stimulates the neoliberal project of globalization. While the concepts of post-colonial, post-socialist, post-Soviet are understood in different ways in different parts of the world, there is nonetheless an understanding that it is within this frame that neoliberalism has become symbolic, and this is important for Eastern and Central Europe, of regime change and democratic state building. In this context, education is justified in policy as a site for building human capital. In Ukraine, this has meant reconceptualizing the Ukrainian citizen as a self-actualizing member of a new technologized knowledge society. Reviewing the first couple of decades of change in teacher training in Central and Eastern Europe since the fall of the Soviet Union, researchers have commented that reforms and changes have reflected several interrelated paradigm-shifting processes, those being de-ideologization, decolonization, demythologization, demonopolization, and decentralization. Promoting these reforms and the acceptance of the transformative teaching professional, трансформаційний педагогічний професіонал, is the new priority in the region. But the profession in the region is also situated at the intersection of demands for competencies aligned with Western models on the one hand, and teacher-directed professional learning based on personal professional choices on the other. It's worth noting here that now, a number of decades after transformative learning was conceptualized, researchers have noted that transformation includes emotions, spirituality, imagination, creativity, and also the experience of loss, dosvid vtrate. The loss factor is fundamental to the Ukrainian experience and aligns with other contexts where struggles for democracy, living amidst war, managing ecological damage, and high migration all challenge teaching and learning. As I mentioned, teachers in Ukraine have been deeply impacted by the worldwide coronavirus pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukraine rolled out the all-Ukrainian online school, Всеукраїнська школа онлайн, hybrid, flipped, and distance online learning for the elementary and secondary grades with materials created by and for teachers. Meanwhile, UNESCO set out a framework to map the new directions of hybrid education systems during the pandemic, creating an additional platformization conformity pressure, platformizacja. But pandemic pedagogies and war pedagogies, as my participants called them, were not simply about reorganizing a course or class onto a video conference, a website, or a learning management system. They also needed to prioritize student health and well-being through more relational, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed methods. But all this within the broader conditions framing education everywhere of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, в обставинах волатильності, невизначеності, складності та неоднозначності. Methodologically, I took a qualitative approach, якісне дослідження, and data collection was conducted over several months. I employed interpretivism because it studies beliefs, ideas, discourses as they appear within, but also frame actions, practices, and institutions. With it, constructivism, because this emphasizes the dynamic and continuous process of human interaction with the world. And subjectivism, which recognizes diverse realities associated with different groups. All of this within a narrative inquiry, because narrative is a storytelling method that contributes to making sense of the world. And how this was conducted? Through visual data instruments, because they offer meaningful insights through metaphor. I used rivers of experience and autophotography, which I'll explain a little bit later in the presentation. And to analyze all of this, I used something called King's template analysis, шаблонний анализ, which is a deductive or figuring out method that produces a thematic relationship key or legend showing the significance of lived experiences, as in my study during crisis, culminating in an overarching story. Let me show you how this template was put together, very briefly. First, I began by grouping insights from each participant's visual artifacts, their rivers and photographs, and comparing the experiences of Eastern and Western Ukrainian teachers in search of intersections, where their themes come together, пошук за перетинами в темах на основі створених дослідчих артефактів. This was followed by identifying consonances, similarities, схожості даних in the data across all participants, including also from group discussions and individual interviews. So layers were added. Likewise, with dissonances or differences, розбіжності в даних across all the data and all the participants. This was then followed by surfacing, bringing out the overarching themes or stories, наскрізні історії, along with important sub-narratives, та піднаратив. Finally, key narratives or stories across the cohort were distilled and affiliated with 3 overriding themes or narratives or stories. Врешті-решт, дистиляція 3 головних тем або наративів. And here you see a sample of a chart I created to help me build my visually based analytical template that I just showed you. Зразок підготовчої таблиці. Given the continued coronavirus pandemic and my location in Canada, all data collection was conducted online. I received consents from 21 individuals, but due to Russia's brutal invasion on February 24th, 2022, I lost contact with nearly half of them. Doing research in the midst of war raised 2 issues. Is it ethical to expect participation during war? And if the participants are willing to participate, is it ethical not to continue? Scholarship states that although victims of humanitarian crises are a vulnerable group and worthy of added protection, it should not prevent them from participating in research if they so wish. And so I ended up with 12 of my original invitees, all willing. They represented a range of Ukrainian oblasts, highlighted here in yellow. Teacher participant careers ranged from about 18 years to 37 years of service. But my research was not concerned with a particular age group or limited by years of experience. I was interested in examining a spectrum of professional teacher journeys in order to discern similarities and differences, as well as cross-generational narratives. Мене цікавили наративи різних поколінь. It was difficult, I won't deny, for participants to join on a scheduled basis or to remain for a full session due to Russia's invasion. In fact, I had to keep my internet on 24 hours a day, and our scheduled discussion sessions or interviews would happen whenever someone had a connection. So I had to be at their disposal, and gladly so. And therefore, perhaps my data collection lasted longer than normal. It was 4 to 5 months, but we did manage to meet all together over the course of that time. I held 4 semi-structured group discussions of various duration to begin with. The final discussion revealed that as of March 14th or 21st, depending on the region, 2022, online learning had resumed in Ukraine and teachers had returned to teaching in person where they had access to their students, or online if their students had fled to another part of Ukraine or to a neighboring country, including teaching internally displaced students. Participants found, though, that the discussions were helpful to them. As one observed here, our focus groups and online face-to-face meetings helped us to feel the ground under our feet in the first months of the war and supported us. And I was glad. Now returning to the data collection instruments. My choice of visual methods, візуальні методи, інструменти, was inspired by the United Kingdom Migration for Development and Equality Multidisciplinary Research Hub, міждисциплінарний дослідницький центр «Міграція для розвитку та рівності у Великій Британії», which draws on a range of creative forms of knowledge production across countries. And it asserts that imagery produced in different cultural settings through various objects transmits multi-layered, culturally embedded knowledge and understandings of experience, багатошарові, культурно закріплені знання та розуміння досвіду. The first task was the design, as I mentioned previously, of personal rivers of experience, річки досвіду. This involves drawing a winding river, noting an event, positive or negative, returning to positive and negative discussion earlier of freedom. The participant feels was critical to their professional growth against each bend in the river. Artistic skill is not required, and rivers of experience can be simple or complex and employ whatever tools the participant is comfortable with and, of course, has at their disposal. A couple of examples you see here. My participants were enabled in this task by deconstructing portions of several sample rivers, like those you just saw, and also my own. Here you have one panel of a two-panel personal, professional river journey that I presented to them and that they deconstructed. But now, let me show you some of their artifacts. You will notice how very different all the depictions are. In other words, they did not simply copy any of my examples. They used color, black and white, drawing, symbol, text, cutouts, objects such as stickies, whatever it was that represented their professional journey to them, using the tools at their disposal, and to be able to produce a product that they could submit to me. And also observe how complete their work is, notwithstanding the very challenging circumstances, lack of internet, electricity, light, access, and the importance of the use of color, both for creative purposes and emphasis. And you will see that some of it is typewritten, some is handwritten. You have a combination of physical and digital, entirely physical. They were very innovative in the way that they approached the task, and everyone completed it. And finally, in this set, please take note of what appears to be very humble bottom right river, which was created on a whiteboard of an abandoned school at night when the participant could get away from his military duties at the front. He is from Kharkiv. Річка внизу, праворуч, була створена на класній дошці покинутої школи вночі, коли учасник міг звільнитися від своїх військових обов'язків на фронті, бо він з Харкова. And in fact, he had to, with the lack of light, cast the light from his phone on this board, take a video capture with an audio accompaniment, and send it to me as a recording. And I'm grateful. In addition, participants engaged in autophotography or photo elicitation, fotoviyavlення. You see a sample of such a photo here. Yes, photos represent individual place in biography, but also, and more importantly, socio-political conditions and change. The participants were asked to share at least one photograph, separately or as a component of their river, but they ended up sending me many photographs and also videos. So my research showed that the use of photos and drawings improved the quality of the individual interviews at the end by prompting recollection, reducing misunderstandings, and stimulating more comprehensive conversation. And so it is not surprising that Metcalf says here that the limit of words and things is the beginning of visual methodologies. Interview questions were many, and they were organized around multiple topics, but the participants could also propose their own, and they proposed perhaps just as many. And their feedback about the experience was quite positive. As one said here, through the opportunity of analyzing and recalling my work experience visually, you gave me inspiration and made me realize that teaching is really my calling. Another above said, you are doing a very worthy work. You are telling the living history of the development of our education, especially in such a difficult time for our country. For those who have not taught children during the war, in shelters, without electricity, communication, and the internet, it is difficult to imagine the conditions in which children in Ukraine, especially in the border areas, receive education. But we are holding on. We are working. This year, we are even holding contests and competitions, albeit online. We are coping. The findings. The findings, or overarching stories, revealed significant consonances or similarities in existential notions about flourishing. Dissonances or differences tended to be a matter of degree and not necessarily geographically divided east-west. Borrowing from the river metaphor, I call these confluences and divergences. The three main areas of confluence, overarching narratives or stories, were the following: perseverance, napolehlivist, which aligns with the theoretical consideration of flourishing and capabilities; sustaining the connection between personal and professional flourishing; capitalizing on the educational collective, such as professional learning communities, and, as my master's work suggested, communities of practice; exercising pedagogical resourcefulness or enterprisingness, підприємливість; addressing the challenging ironies of policy and practice through close relations between school, colleagues, local community, parents, and principals. In other words, an ecosystemic approach. And to this end, adopting a stress is enhancing mindset through purposeful attention to positivity, a hope-filled perspective. The next overarching theme or story: innovation, innovacyjність, aligned with neoliberalism theory. Departing from traditional educational philosophies and practices, evolving new pedagogies, and embracing combined approaches, such as one called the entangled pedagogy, which is a synergy, a combination or collaboration of technology, pedagogy, and educational stakeholders, where leadership is distributed. Acquiring skills and competencies through lifelong learning, championing education reform, and to this end, intentionality, adopting the purpose-driven mindset of entrepreneurs, цілеспрямоване мислення. And finally, the third overarching story or confluence: identity, ідентичність, which aligns with teacher professionalism. Ongoing self-improvement and pursuit of excellence, uniting personal and professional identities, an abiding faith in teacher impactfulness, впливовість педагога, taking an ecological view of education and their role as educator global citizens. And to do all this, leading as caring nation builders by exerting moral agency. A little bit about each one. Perseverance, as captured by one of my participants who quoted an author she refers to, and I quote, "This is why, when we think we can't possibly try again, we let out a sigh that goes back through the centuries. And then, despite all our experience, we inhale and try again." And as this same author says, you must meet the outer world with your inner world, or existence will crush you. This finding supports research about the role of perseverance in developing dynamic capabilities, that is, capabilities that serve a professional as a source of competitive advantage, конкурентноспроможності. For my participants, this also meant focusing on relationships, as I mentioned earlier, a finding that underscores the crucial and symbiotic relationship between schools, families, and communities, which educational researchers report still today are being overlooked by policymakers. About innovation. My participants were very keen to be seen as innovators. They engaged in principled infidelity when braving change agency and acting as early adopters of Education 4.0. They did not wait for legislative or policy challenges and decisions, but moved ahead of the system as models. It's interesting that only about a week ago, the Ministry of Education of Ukraine announced public talks, including teachers, about education for a changing world, освіта для мінливого світу. But my participants were already addressing this issue for some time by regularly asking themselves a very important question. What kind of pedagogy does justice to the experience and challenge of living in a complex world? The source of my participants' distinct innovativeness was their cognitive reserve, когнитивный запас, the ability to improvise and find alternate ways of getting a job done by pulling on skills and capacities to solve problems and cope with challenges in novel ways. Cognitive reserve, it's worth remembering, is developed over a lifetime of education and curiosity. And finally, a little about identity. My participants emphasized robust involvement with international educational projects, grants, contests, and competitions. Also, education in support of sustainable development goals. Освіта на підтримку цілей сталого розвитку. This is their hallmark, their emblem, which they see as reflective of world citizenship and protective of their native land. Key as well was keeping up both with attestation and certification. They remarked that all of this, yes, results in considerably more work, but is stimulating, fortifying, and prestigious. Results from my study showed that personal culture, pedagogical culture, and professional culture are integral to the participants' identity. These teachers strive to nurture their professional selves through creativity, autonomy, and a strong sense of their role as caring nation builders, responsible, as many of them said, even more so than the parents of their children, their students. This presents a thoughtful case for the idea of capability potentiation, посилення спроможності, including exemplifying democratic principles and future building. And in fact, I think the following, which I'm going to show you, it captures my participants' sense of their identity very well. To teach is to believe in continuing, to share with you critical feelings about the past, to try to describe and assess the present, and these actions, by their very nature, imply a firm belief in a future. It turned out that 11 of my participants were female and only one male. And while I acknowledge this gender imbalance, over which I had no control under the circumstances, was a factor, elementary school teachers nonetheless in Ukraine are predominantly and historically female. Similarly, only 3 of the 12 were currently working in rural schools, but their data was invaluable as it indicated lingering traditionalist attitudes among some colleagues, such as authoritative teaching, or authoritarian teaching rather, ambivalence to the Russian language, resistance to the new Ukrainian school policy, resistance to other innovations, and difficulties serving special needs pupils or implementing inclusive education. So those were the dissonances that arose. The revelations from my study regarding teacher professionalism in crisis conditions contribute to the worldwide discourse and include now Ukraine. The study also adds research on teacher well-being in conflict-affected contexts, showing that education can have a healing role for teachers. Освіта відіграє цілющу роль для вчителів, as well as for students. While confronted with daily hardships and challenges, teachers do not want to abdicate their role as educators. Their strong sense of vocation and motivation to continue teaching under such challenging circumstances contributes to scholarship, demonstrating the dynamic interaction among technology, people, and cultural circumstances for work engagement. And this informs even my own work developing collections of digital pedagogical resources for Ukrainian as an additional language in any environment. What's the possible further research that has come from this? So, well, I have multiple ideas. However, one would be, for example, to investigate how elementary teachers use Ukrainian children's literature as a trauma intervention during the current war within the country with both native and displaced children, and in countries of temporary settlement. Perhaps a broader investigative question might be, once Ukraine accedes to the European Union, and it will teachers experience greater freedom, flourishing, or more constraints, floundering, when they are fully subject to European Union policies? In any case, I just wanted to bring attention to the image on the screen here. You probably read about this. It was all over the news of the Ukrainian kindergarten teacher who had joined the defense and shot down a missile, thereby protecting the lives of her school and school community. Why do I say this? Because the educational front continues to be important in Ukraine and for the worldwide discourse. And I just wanted to say, bravo, Освітній front. I want to thank everybody for your attention. I look forward to your questions and comments. Please feel free to connect with me either via email or the QR code. Дякую вам всім, що вислухали мене. З нетерпінням чекаю ваші запитання, коментарі. Сміло можете зв'язатися зі мною по електронці або за QR-кодом. І дозвольте прочитати Dora Chomyak, the head of Razum Ukraine's comments on the third anniversary of war in Ukraine. In Ukraine, people aren't freaking out. They are figuring it out. They aren't panicking. They are persevering. They aren't waiting. They are acting. Дякую вам.
Уляно, дуже дякую. I can't help but begin our comments by saying that just as your themes discuss perseverance, innovation, and identity, so did your research require you to persevere throughout the challenges and to select a wonderfully innovative, qualitative research approach to a very profound question, especially during times of war, and to illuminate the power of our identity and your own identity as a professional teacher educator. Дуже дякую. And with that, let's open the floor to questions or comments.
Let me see, is there anything in the chat? Not that I can see.
I see Roman Petrician moving his fingers towards his keyboard. Романе, прошу.
Ну, дуже дякую. Дійсно, надзвичайно цікава доповідь і стимулює людину внутрішньо, щоб війти в діалог з тобою, щоб зрозуміти, що ми можемо далі робити в цьому напрямі. You made a comment about a concept that Snyder has written about freedom to and freedom from.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you would comment a little more fully on how those concepts emerged in your work.
Going back to the idea of the positive and negative freedoms, what I found as I was communicating with these individuals, and of course, their circumstances were evolving as we continued the data collection, so nothing was stable throughout that time. In their minds, they started to embrace what negative freedom means, and that it does not mean that your work stops, or that you are unable to teach, or that children are unable to learn. That adaptability involves recognizing everything at your disposal as opposed to what has been taken away from you. And for example, the freedom of being able to communicate with children at any hour of the night over social media, which they had not been using before, did not think was a forum for teaching and learning, including communicating with parents for the purposes of their students' or pupils' learning, was a way in which they capitalized on the limited situation that they had, either with connectivity or with access to their students, by using what became evident to them as available tools for teaching and learning. Just as an example, the embrace of alternate approaches that they did not recognize before.
Thank you.
May I? I'm afraid my voice is going to be a little bit low because we're all going through a flu period here, so I
Oh, boy.
apologize for my tone. Ulana, thank you so much. I mean, you and I have discussed your research in the past, and I know the trouble that you went through and the difficulties that you went through and the challenges that you went through, and I'm really very impressed. I'd like to ask if you could please provide a little bit more information on a very interesting methodology that you presented, where people draw,
Yes.
create. It's new to me. Okay, I apologize for saying that it's new to me. Maybe I should know more about it. But could you enlighten us a little bit more about this methodology? I think it's fascinating.
So this is a constructivist methodology, and its inventor or conceptualizer, Professor Emerita Pam DeNiccolo, who is not only an educator but a constructivist psychologist, happens to be someone that I had a discussion with prior to commencing this research, when I was trying to think of ways in which teachers could communicate their experience without having to be reliant on the written word or the spoken word necessarily. Because I anticipated with COVID and with the distance factor, and distance factor, just like time factor, always play into research, that we needed to enhance their positive freedom. Having developed this tool, which used to be called Career Snakes in, I believe, 1990, this was actually a training technique to help people understand that they have experienced a great deal and accomplished a great deal in their careers, to recognize what point they are now, and to project into the future where they might go, notwithstanding any challenges in their careers. And this was in general terms when this method was developed. Of course, when you overlay the layer of crisis, conflict, war, in some cases, natural disaster, and so on and so forth, it permits the user of this tool to find ways to express, as I was talking there about the transformative teaching professional, certain spiritual, emotional, imaginative elements that might not come through in more traditional instruments of contributing data. The beauty of it is you do not have to be an artist. How you present this, and I had people, doing stick people in a little drawing with a pencil, and they sent me that prior drawing just to say, I'm getting my ideas down. But there's so much I want to say that by the time they sent me their final drawing, you saw how complex those rivers were, notwithstanding their circumstances. So it did provide them with this freedom within constraint to communicate perhaps that which they could not otherwise. It is my understanding from Professor DeNiccolo that this has been a very successful tool in a variety of environments. Yes, within Dr. Bilash is talking about arts-based research. In fact, that MyDeck group in the UK is involved in arts-based, also, and included here textile-based research. So, for example, embroidery as a communicative method, a method of messaging, and so on. So, within this broader range of visual styles, there's just so much more opportunity to express themselves for people who might otherwise be limited for some reason. And I should say there's also the emotional element. Some people, and this came out during the focused discussions, some people were at a point where they simply could not speak. They were so shocked, overwhelmed, disbelieving. And this was, remember, the first few days and months of the war, that they needed a way to communicate that got past the verbal so that they could deal with their emotions, process their emotions, and in fact, process their emotions through art therapy, which some of them did identify this tool as.
Thank you, Ulana. And if I may just add to that last statement, art therapy is being widely used at this point, both in school, in Lviv, and specifically with the military personnel that require it and the families. It's being widely used at this point, and it's something very new for me. And I have been privy to being able to observe some of this, and this is why this is fascinating. What you've just brought out, it's very timely, and thank you so much.
And I thank everybody working in Ukraine using their creative resources to help people manage what they are experiencing so that they can see ahead, not just in the moment. And let's see if there's anyone else would like to contribute some thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say that this type of research is also grounded in transformation. And so it's very effective in rehabilitation. It's widely used in Canada in cancer treatment centers as well. So it's wonderful to see the innovation that you're bringing to a community that has traditionally used words to express its research. So yeah, another check mark for the innovation, Ulana. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Well, as people chew on this, if someone likes to contact me and continue the conversation, I'm always happy. And the threads of research, they can continue from here.
If no one else has, I can make a comment. You mentioned in your research that your subjects or your participants were mostly female, because traditionally primary teachers in Ukraine are female. Well, that has changed in the last 2-3 years, drastically. If you walk into any elementary classroom at this point, primary age and junior classrooms, you will see many young men. There are many reasons for that, but we are also hoping that they will stay in education. That is part of the goal. But you see a lot more males in schools at this point. So it is helping the children, and it's good for the children. So
I agree with you.
Yeah.
In fact,
what you said was true, but there is a change.
Yeah, things have changed since this was conducted. It's interesting that you say that, because the one male that was involved in this particular research was extremely active across a range of schools over his career, as compared to the other teachers who tended to stay in one and the same school. And his philosophy was he could only make a difference if he kept going from student to student, from school to school. I do believe that there's something in that perhaps the male population, if we can call it that, will bring, now that it has sort of entered the fray.
Mm-hmm.
We all need multiple interactions, is essentially what I am saying. And so do the students.
Agreed, yes.
So when we invited Ulana to do this presentation, initially I said, let's do two, one in Ukrainian and one in English. And I am thinking now about the audience of teachers in Ukraine who I think could benefit, and pedagogic academics. So I'm still going to invite you, Ulana, to do another one in Ukrainian at some point, and then rely on people like Oksana Vinitska-Yusupovich to help spread the word in Ukraine, and Dr. Olena Huzar in Ternopil to also help her colleagues become interested, and Yulia Popolishin and Oksana Zabolotna, because if you let people know about this, they say if you build it, they will come. And I'm sure you all agree this was fascinating, and that thank you, Ulana, for translating many things as you went along, but certainly being able to do your presentation entirely in Ukrainian for a Ukrainian-speaking audience would be very enriching for everyone.
I hear you. I hear you. The original motivation for this was to get the Ukrainian experience and the Ukrainian discourse out into the English-speaking scholarly world. Because as you know, we are fighting disinformation on all fronts. Але це не означає, що я не є зацікавлена розмовляти з українськими педагогами і щоб той дискурс розвивався в Україні. Так що, будь ласка.
I think it's an excellent idea, Olenka, and I think that that it might stimulate, or it will stimulate for sure, scholars in Ukraine to pursue some of these questions as well, which is really, really necessary and really, really needed, especially the methodology that you presented. It's very unique, it's very different, the perspectives you presented. So the challenge will be to make sure that it goes through official channels, but let's find a way to do that, and I will support that in whatever ways I can. Mm-hmm.
Крок за кроком, так чи ні?
I also, if you're not on the ULEC mailing list, I've added the ULEC email address in our chat. We have lined up about 5 or 6 more top-notch academic presentations in the next few months, focusing on displaced children and teachers in Ukraine, or rather from Ukraine or in Ukraine. And we hope to have a good audience for them. Also wanted to mention that we record all of our videos and we let people have the link. And if you don't get the link, you can go to our website where you should be able to find it for future use. Уляно, ще раз дякую.
Моя приємність. Дякую, що ви прослухали і роздумуєте ті питання далі, тому що Україна була, є і буде.
Дуже дякую, Олена.
Дякуємо.
Дякуємо всім.
Дякую,
Олено.
До зустрічі.
Дякую.
До зустрічі.
Дуже дякую.